Hello there. I hope you are doing great. In this video, we'll be creating a simple web server in Golang, and we'll be using the test-driven development software development methodology. So it would be a very basic web server that would serve some static and some dynamic web pages. It will accept a post form request and it will update the data in the server accordingly. It won't use any relational or non-relational database. It will simply update the data into an in-memory list, and we won't be building a REST framework, that is the CRUD operations that takes JSON input. So the idea of this simple project is not to build some very fancy website or web server. The idea here is to understand the basics of how we can test our web servers, and we'll build some fundamentals of how a web server can be built using test driven development, and these fundamentals then can easily be scaled up to creating CRUD APIs or using databases, MongoDB, MySQL, or any sort of those databases. So in this process, we'll learn about how we can use HTML templates to build a dynamic website, and also we can learn about something known as approval tests, which would be very helpful when building some complex outputs. Like when we are outputting the HTML pages, it is very unlikely that we should check for each line if it contains the correct data as we want. So I'll show you how approval tests come in handy when dealing with complex outputs. And so here's the structure of our website. So our server would have mainly three endpoints. One would be the ping that would simply return if the website is working or not, and then there will be an index page that would list all the form inputs that we had given it, and it will pre-populated with some dummy data to start with, and then we'll create the /form endpoint, which would give us a form to enter the data, and it would update the data, and the form would accept two requests. The get request will give us the form that we will need to fill in, and the post request would accept that form and update the data in the backend. So this is our simple web server that we'll be building. So let's start coding. So here we are in a VS Code, and we'll be building the web server. So for that, first I'll just go mod init, then I'll create a web folder, a server, and inside that I'll just create a server test.go file which will contain our tests. So to test, there are two methods. The one method is to spawn a small test server, and the Golang will give you a URL, and in which you can hit the endpoints and test the results. There's another method which uses response recorder. So in this we call the handlers, and we pass the response writer and request accordingly, and we check the responses stored in the response writer, and we pass the test accordingly. So I prefer the first method because it is easier to perform and understand. So I'll be spawning a test server, and I'll perform requests on that, and I'll test the results accordingly. And inside this we need to pass a handler. So we'll create a new handler a new server function that will give us the HTTP handler. Now we are performing get request in the server URL that the http test.new server will give us. So the get request gives us a response and error, and we'll perform our checks on the response object. So before that, we need to ensure that the error is nil. So for that, I'll create a helper function. So here we can just call the assert no error, and we'll pass that to testing t and error. So one thing we need to do is, if this fails, there is an error, the output of the error log will show this line number, but that is an unexpected behavior because the error must show the line, this line. So for that there is a method known as t.helper. So this will give us the correct line number. If there is an error in this line, it will show the error in this line. So hence we added this t.helper, and then we'll perform checks on the result, and this returns bytes and error. So before checking this body, we need to check for the status code. So for that we'll again create an helper function that will take t and response and the expected status code. Status, okay. So here again we'll call t.helper, and so the expected status code is expected status code, and what we got is rest.status code, and in the bracket we'll just show response.status. So it will show the status code and the status string as well. So this would be helpful for debugging. So now for the timing, before checking for these results, we'll just check for the status code first. So we use these to test all the test cases inside our directories and subdirectories and so on. And this dash v is to show verbose. I mean, if there is any print statement or something, it would be shown here. So now it says undefined server. So let's create the server. So now it says new server, no value is used. So we need to return http.handler. So it shows expected 20 and got 4. So the serve mux in the serve mux we can assign the string pattern of the endpoint and the function that will handle that request on those endpoints. For the timing, I added this default one. So now we have to create our own. So here to test the ping, we need to check for /ping endpoint rather than just the /endpoint, and this will be handled by, let's say, no function, and we'll just return the s. Okay, it shows an error because we passed in it. So we need to create a handle function, and let's just pass in this function handle ping. So it passed. Okay, so this is the test driven development method to add incremental changes to our code and run the tests after each change, and gradually update the test to our actual code, and the development process is gradual but stable. So the end result would be a fairly stable code base that you can rely upon. So now we need to check if the ping responds correctly. I mean, the response should be something like the server is working fine, so we can check for that. So here's our test case. Let's run this and see if it passes or fails. So it fails. It says expected server is working, got an empty string. So we can just, so here we are writing the string into the response writer. It passed. So our ping functionality is working fine. So I can also just show you how it would look in a browser. So I'll create a cmd folder, and inside that I'll create a main.go file, and inside that I'll use the 8082 port, and I'll pass in the server.newServer function as the handler. And before that I'll just print. So let's run this cmd. So it's asking for the permission to access the port, and then I'll just localhost :8082. So it says page not found, but we need to check for the ping. So it shows the result that server is working. So this is how we can check in the web browser as well. Now getting back to our code, we need to write the index page. So the slash would give us the list of all the form data. So the form will just contain one item. So for this we will use approval test. This would give us a web page, and instead of checking each line through programming, we will approve the output, and it will check for the same output every time we run a test. So for that we need to import a library. I'll show you the GitHub page of it. So this is the library, and we are gonna use it. And we'll just call approvals dot verify string. We'll use this function to verify the string. So before that I'll just okay, so now it imported this approvals. So first we need to check for the output, and since we need to check for the slash the index page, so we won't append anything here. Now since we got the output of the response, we'll just call the approvals dot verify string, and we'll pass in the t and the. So this is how approval tests work. Instead of checking themselves, they ask you to approve a file that the test will check again and again each time. So for the time being, it says that the received file is this. I mean the output which it got from the endpoint is this, and for now we haven't created any approval that it should check from. So it showed that approved response is an empty string. But this is not the response we would like to approve. So we'll change our code and wait till we get the expected response, and then we'll just approve it by renaming this file to the approved one. So for that we need to create handle func another, and it will just call to the index, and then we'll do index handler. So here we created the index handler. We should check for the status code as well. So I'll just do an assert status code. So I need to delete both the approvals before rerunning the test. So to get a valid output, what we need to do is to create a HTML page that would be served from the Golang. So for that I'll create a templates directory, and inside that I'll just create an index.html template, and I'll initialize it with some boilerplate code, and it will show a list of all items. So for that we need to range over whatever is given to us, and at the end we'll just to end the for loop, and we'll just print, and we'll display this in a checkbox. We will pass in a list of strings in this template, and this block will loop over the list of strings, and here the dot variable will have the list of strings that we will pass, and inside this range block this dot variable will have each string that it loops over. So if it would have been a struct or a list of structs, suppose it would have been a list of structs, So here we would have to do dot, let's say it may have title, so dot title, and here we would need to access dot body, so we'll just do dot body. But here it, because it is simply a list of strings, we can easily access the strings using the dot variable. So to access these templates, what we can do is, one way is to access the index.html from the directly each time we execute it. But there is another way in Golang known as Go embed. So what it does, it embeds the file system that we specify into the executable itself. So next time we build an executable, we don't have to worry about the file structure, that there is a templates directory, and inside there is a index.html folder in the file system, that because that file system structure would be embedded in the binary itself, so it would be easier to execute, and we don't have to worry about the file system. So we'll use that Go embed. So here we specified what to embed in the template fs, and now to initialize, we will just initialize the templates, all the templates inside the init function, so we don't have to worry about it when we are calling those inside the function. So I'll just declare another global variable known as template. It would come from the HTML template, and it would be a template stuff. So I initialize this error variable, because if I didn't, it shows error, and if I do the bolus operator, still it shows error. So this is the workaround to first initialize this error, and then, so here we pass the templates and store the templates here, and then after that we can easily use templates.execute to call those templates and get the results. And here's the error handling part. So yeah, so now what we can do is we can just call the template dot execute template, and we can pass in the response writer, and we can call the index.html template, and we can pass in the data, and as for the data, we will pass the items, and the items will be a list of strings as we. So in the init block itself, what we can also do is to initialize the items with the dummy data. So I'm initializing it with some dummy variables, and I'll just call it in the init function. So now let's see if the output we get, we can approve it or not. So it shows, so the received output is odd item, it's a checkbox, and name is label, and ID is lab. So this seems fine. So I'll just delete the approved part, and I'll just rename this to approved. Now if we run the test, it should pass. Okay, it passed. So now it expects this output, and it gets this as well. So we are done with the index handler. We can test one more thing, that if the index gets a post request, it returns a method not available or something instead of getting this. So what I'll do is I'll just extract this into another t.run. Like if you need to run multiple tests on the same function, it is better to use the run function. It makes the code more readable, and the output as well as more readable. So now we should just delete, run the test again. So again we need to approve this, because the name of the test has changed. I'll just delete the approved and rename the received one. Now if we run the test, I think it should pass. Yeah, all the tests passed. So now let's get back to testing if that any method apart from get should give us method not found or something. So I'll just loop over the method type. Method, I'll just do post. So we'll loop through these method names, and URL will be s.url, the index URL, and the body will be nil. Oh, it's request, and then we'll need to do http.do default client.do, and we'll pass in the request, and this returns a response and error, and we'll again check assert no error, and we'll assert the status code. Now let's run the test. It fails. It says expected 404, got 200. So what we'll just update the server.go file. Now all the test passes. So now the last thing we need to worry about is the slash form URL. So the index page is done and the test ping is done, and then we'll just do. And this again will have two tests. So we'll use t.run. So first test would check. Before calling the function, we need to initialize the server. http test.new server, and we'll initialize server.new server. We'll simply do http.get, and we'll call s.url, and we'll append slash form. So first we'll check these two functions, then we'll check for the response. We'll check for the approval response then. So it passes the function. Okay, this seems to be strange, but let's check if approval also says the same story. Let's say what it got the response. So here it got the index HTML page. So we don't want that. We want to create another form page. So we'll just delete these two, and we'll add a slash form to URL. So in this we don't want to pass in any data, so we'll just pass in the nil, and let's execute this. So this should give us an error. Face the approval test, and I'll create form.html page. Action by default it would post to slash form itself, and here I'll just add a okay. Now the response is this, which to me appears to be fine, and so let's just approve this, or maybe we can run this in the browser and check if the code appears to be fine, the HTML appears to be fine or not. Okay, here is some error in the index page as well. It shows the list in a straight, inline fashion. So we need to change the index HTML as well, and this appears to be fine, and we also need to add a submit button to it. So we need to do two changes in the HTML pages. So let's do that. This will fix and we can also add a heading. After the form we'll add a button. So let's check this again. So here's our heading. Here we go. List doesn't return anything, so we need to fix it. So for the time being, our get function for index as well as form is works fine. So I'll just approve the test. So to approve, I'll just need to delete the approved ones and rename. So now the next thing we need to do is to test for the post function, post request in the form. So we'll create another test.run. So to test this, there are two ways. Either we can expose some API for the to-dos list here. Items list is private. So one way is we can make this public, or we can convert this into another type of itself and expose some APIs from this. We can check if some item is contained in this list or the length of this list and so on. So this would be the ideal case. I mean, ideally we should do that, but this would take more time and it's our last test. So I'll just use the existing API, the get index page, and I'll just check if after the post request is made, our item is inside the updated index.html. I mean, first I'll call the get request in the index page, that's the slash page, and I'll check that our item is not in that page earlier, and then after I'll post a form and the item, and after the post request I'll again call the get request and assert that now that item should be in the index page. I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. So first I'll do, then I'm gonna perform post and then call index. Okay, so this is a three-step process how we'll perform the check for the post request of this. So first let's call the get function. And I'll just create the new item string, and I'll add some random things to make it unique. So if this is there, if this new item is already contained in the index response, we should throw an error. This completes our first part. The second part is we'll just perform the post request, the post form request, because we are simulating the form post rather than posting a JSON file or a string or XML or something. And inside the data we'll just use the URL value, and so here let's see what we are putting is in the name. So we are putting the item name should also be item, and the ID should also be item, then it would work properly. Okay, so the ID and the name and false is wrong, so we'll have to add the item, and I'll just assign this to new item. So this performs a post request. So I'm also applying the approval test for the response from the post result, and then I'll just call this I'll perform this get request again. So I just reverse the thing and I just call this again. So here we are performing two tests. So I'll skip the approval test for now. For now, I am just checking if the new item is found in the index page after the post form. Okay, since I have changed the name of the function, it is again. So to be on a safer side, I'll just delete all the approvals and approve them one by one again. So this is the form, the get in the form. This is fine, and this is index page in the get. Yeah, this is fine. Okay, so I'll just approve both the tests. I'll just run the function again, and yeah, so now it fails that this string should have been in the index page, but it wasn't found. That means our post function doesn't work properly. So we need to go in the form, we need to handle the post method. I'm gonna first parse the form data, parse form. And then I'll just do r.form.get, and I'll get the item, and this will give me the string. And I'll do what I'll do is item.append new item. So this is all we need to do. So this should pass our test. Let's check. Yeah, it passed. It says okay. If I open this in our browser, so if I do /form and I post it, so it gives me an empty response. What I can check is if it gives back the same response as the index. I'll just uncomment the approval test. So this is not what we wanna approve, so I'll just delete those. I'll just copy this execute statement. So it will just return the same index.html as the other. So yeah, it gives back the index.html with this added item. So I'll just approve this, and I'll just run the test. All the tests pass, and I'll just run the main file. This works. This appears to work fine. The /form page. This adds the new item and the /ping. The server is working. All the 3 pages, and everything seems to work fine. I hope you got to learn something new from this video, and thanks for watching.